All right, we're going to give it another 2 minutes or so. So panelists, appreciate your patience. Attendees, just bear with us as we queue up all of our distinguished speakers. All right, why don't we kick off, everyone? A very good morning to you. Welcome to the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance's latest global member call. Our topic today is the United States infrastructure bill that is in the Senate and its impact on the crypto asset industry. It might be fairly significant. We are expecting a couple more panelists. One of them is in Washington, so we'll figure out how he joins and when he joins. Some housekeeping for today's call. This event is being recorded. It is provided for general information purposes only. Nothing discussed is legal, investment, tax, accounting, or any opinion or advice. Amy is smiling because she's heard me say that way too much in so many meetings that we've been to. All attendees will be in listen-only mode during these discussions. We will, of course, reserve time for Q&A after each of the segments. Please submit your questions via the Zoom chat, and I'll engage directly with our panelists on your behalf as well. So why don't we kick off? We've got a great group of panelists as well. I want to give all of them a few moments to introduce themselves to the audience as well. We've got a whole bunch of folks piling in now. Amy, can we kick off with you, who you are, who you work for, and why you're stuck with us today?
Sure. My name is Amy Miller. I'm based out of Washington, D.C., and I work for the AICPA Tax Policy and Advocacy team. And what we do is I manage a group that we call our Virtual Currency Tax Task Force, and we submit comments to IRS, Treasury, and the Hill. And for the past few years, we've been working on all the much needed guidance on virtual currency that is needed from the IRS.
Great, thank you, Amy. Sean, why don't we go to you?
Absolutely. Morning, everybody. Sean Stein-Smith here. I'm on the faculty at Lehman College during the day, and I am here and I'm here today on this panel in my capacity as the chair of the accounting working group.
Excellent, thank you, David.
David Pope with excuse me, with DAP CPA Pope and Jackson Inc. in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and I'm one of the original co-founders of the Wyoming Blockchain Coalition.
Excellent, thank you. And Stephen.
I'm Stephen Rittenberg. I'm one of the co-heads of our fintech efforts at Pulcinelli, which is a law firm very active in the space and a member of the legal working group.
Great, thank you all. I want to kick off. We do have a special guest. He's dialing in by phone. To kick it off, I wanted to introduce my kind of brief fireside chat, and panelists, if you want to go on mute for a few moments, just want to get some perspective from what's going on in Washington. We have Landon Zinda. Landon, I hope you can hear me. Can you hear us good?
I can. Can you hear me?
Indeed, welcome. Landon, for everyone on the call, is counsel for the United States Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. Landon, it's been way too long, my friend. Welcome to the global member call of the WSBA.
Thanks for having me. I had reserved the Senate banking room and was prepared to show a pretty nice background, but we are running around this morning dealing with this tax provision in the infrastructure bill. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely, I can imagine. And kind of being at that front line, and I know you're going to be running around, so we'll carry it just for a few moments. I want to kick it off with, the industry, the crypto industry was really surprised that very deeply buried within this, 2,700 page infrastructure bill were pretty impactful provisions from the perspective of the crypto industry, from a reporting perspective, a tax perspective. Can you give us the update to the extent you're able to discuss it? What's the status now? What does that look like? There were competing amendments. There's been a whole lot of advocacy across the industry. What's your view from the front line there?
Yeah, so the substitute amendment for the infrastructure bill passed cloture yesterday. However, there's still the entire day-to-day where senators can agree by unanimous consent to include something in the underlying text. Senator Toomey and a bunch of other senators have seen issues with this provision, essentially applying broker tax reporting requirements to potentially what could be most of the cryptocurrency industry, including miners, network validators, software and hardware wallets, and even people who develop protocols who no longer have any sort of underlying control or ability to report this information in the future. So this has really got the attention of a number of senators, Senator Toomey, Senator Portman, Senator Warner, Senator Wyden. A number of senators are talking as we speak, trying to figure this out and trying to see if everyone in the Senate would agree to some sort of unanimous consent change to these provisions. And Senator Wyden and Senator Toomey had put out an amendment a couple days ago, which had provided for explicit clarity for miners, hardware and software wallet developers, and these developers of protocols, that they wouldn't be brokers for this tax reporting requirement.
Landon, I think one of the interesting things for participants in different industries that don't quite know how the sausage gets made in Washington, so to speak, you referenced a couple of amendments. One was it's the Wyden Loomis Toomey amendment. The other one was Portman Warner. Why the competing amendments? Can you bring any insight to private market participants about how and why that would happen?
That is a good question. I will just preface it with saying I spent 6 years with Representative Tom Emmer in the House and recently just joined the Senate Banking Committee. So I've only been here for a few months, and this is my first kind of real fight on these topics. But what was proposed by Senator Portman and others was what's considered a side-by-side, which is essentially another choice for the chamber to choose how they want to proceed on a topic like this. So just in the discussions with Senator Toomey and others, including Senator Portman, they have all largely agreed that these provisions should not apply to minors and other people who don't have this information currently, and even to individuals who could not even possibly get it. So they've laid out an alternative, but I would just say that discussions are very much ongoing. I'd expect additional developments today, and it's rather than a alternative choice there, I think all these senators are working together to try to find a solution.
Landon, thanks for that. I remember I had the privilege of meeting with you a couple of times, certainly when you were with Emmer's office. And I remember one of the conversations we had was the interesting dichotomy between senators and congresspeople who understand the technology, understand the industry, and a whole bunch of others who don't. Do you still see that education gap, and how is that changing? There are organizations that visit. Wall Street Blockchain Alliance does likewise. Do you still see that as a challenge?
I definitely do. There's been a number of members who have gotten very into this topic and have become extremely educated on it. Coming over from the House, I think the Senate had kind of lagged behind the House in terms of discussions on these topics. Certainly Mike Crapo, doing Senate banking prior to Senator Toomey, had done a couple of hearings on this topic. But in terms of legislation and other developments, there hadn't really been a whole lot in the Senate. This term, you're seeing a lot more members get interested in these topics, talk about central bank digital currencies, stable coins, exchanges, all, we're starting to run the gamut of topics here. So the education level is increasing, but especially for this current tax and broker debate, the administration and Congress are starting to talk about decentralized finance for one of the first times I think it has ever really discussed that. I do know a couple letters from Senator Warren had discussed the topic, but to my knowledge, that and Anthony Gonzalez in the House mentioning DeFi, that to my knowledge was the extent of what Congress had weighed in on for decentralized finance. So now we're seeing this tax and broker provision call into question these new protocols, and that's all in the context of Congress barely having addressed it so far. So the education is increasing, but it's starting to be needed at an even faster pace and to even more members.
Right. And we're planning, Landon, we should probably schedule that. The WSBA is planning on fall visits to Washington, particularly as things open up a bit more. A couple of questions to leave it there, because I know you've got to run, Landon, and you're running around on the Hill a bit. A lot of the perspective has been that the original wording of the amendments comes from Treasury. This perspective that Janet Yellen's not particularly fond of anything crypto related. Can you speak to that? Is that your perspective? Is that kind of the perspective in DC? Is there any merit to that at all?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that Treasury is deeply involved in these conversations, cares very much about this topic. I think both sides want to see people, current definition of broker is a middleman with respect to property. And I think both sides would agree that there are centralized exchanges and others who do serve as brokers in the cryptocurrency space. But I do think that Treasury is very interested in decentralized finance, decentralized exchanges. The protocols being developed there are protocols that, by their objective and their goal, is to eliminate the middleman. And so with this debate, you're seeing that authority that may not currently exist try to be molded around this new technology and trying to get at some of these protocols that were a software developer to create them and have no customers or have no involvement in the underlying governance of the system. It's hard to say that those people would actually be brokers. So, long way to say Treasury cares about this deeply and provides a lot of input.
Yep. No, I appreciate that, Lyndon. And then one last question that I've gotten, certainly I want to open it up to our other panelists who have any questions for you. And if there's anyone in the audience, any of the attendees who want to chat over a question for Lyndon, please do. One of the questions I have is, how can we help? And you've seen the WSBA, Lyndon, we signed on to a multi-industry participant letter that was to Senator Schumer and Senator McConnell, supporting the Wyden proposed verbiage. There's still opportunity here to reach out to representatives, correct? What's your perspective on how people in the industry can help to promote the better worded amendments?
Yeah, I certainly appreciate that letter. It has been extremely helpful. WSBA and others coming on record supporting specific amendments. I think it's not one of the first tests, but it is probably the strongest point where the community has kind of come together and mobilized and made their voices known in Congress. I forget the number, but several thousands of calls have gone into to offices at this point. I think keeping that up is one of the most helpful things at this point. When we're talking requiring unanimous consent and needing the support of every senator, no matter who represents you, it can be helpful to weigh in with them at this point. But continue to provide input to Senator Wyden, Senator Toomey, any sort of contact you can make to advocate for this provision, or just provide your experience in this industry and what you've learned, if there's a product or a service that you have, showing it to members of Congress and helping them understand what the good use cases are, what the developing technologies are. That's all going to help in the future when they have to decide on a topic like this.
Landon, thanks. A couple of questions from the audience. One of our members, when do you think the timeline would be for when the new rules would be able to be enforced, assuming something gets passed as part of an agreed bill?
That is a good question. I probably haven't paid attention to the timeline, the start date on some of this, as I should have, just kind of scrambling to make the rules as best they can be before they're enacted in an infrastructure bill. It's very odd that we are dealing with new technologies like DeFi and getting revenue from the cryptocurrency industry to pay for infrastructure. But my understanding is that these timelines are delayed by at least a year, if not two, and that potential compliance starts somewhere around 2023. Looking at some of the projections in terms of revenue, they don't get anything for a couple of years. So there is a on-ramp to start to comply. I'm not 100% sure about that.
Great, thank you. And one more question from Ann, one of our attendees. Ann, thanks for the question. There seems to be, there seems to be some confusion between decentralized exchanges and blockchain protocols. Blockchain consensus protocol is not by definition an exchange. Is there that understanding on the Hill? Was that part of the education conversation, Linda, in your mind, where they just, the concepts really haven't sunk in yet with representatives because they're just not involved?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think the concepts are very differentiated in Congress at this point. I think just getting to the concept of a decentralized exchange is something new for a lot of members. Understanding the difference between that and a protocol is something that everybody here, I think, is still working on. But I do appreciate that Senator Wyden has been a part of this effort, because he has been advocating specifically for individuals who are programmers, software developers, that create a network that might be open and public and available to anyone, but really just program code and without having been involved in any further action on that protocol, should really not have to comply with tax reporting requirements that they do not have access to or could not obtain. So that is a topic that has barely been approached in Congress, and ideally it probably should be before we start to legislate on that topic.
Right, thank you, Landon. And Matt, one of our attendees, he had posted some of their research material from a member of the WSBA Crow. I believe it's 18 to 24 months for implementation. Seems to be aligning with what you're talking about, Landon. Any questions from our panelists for Landon while he's at the front lines in Washington?
Just a quick question, Landon. David Pope here. Is it true that the JCT score on the amendments went down, or the JCT predicted fewer revenues with the amendment?
Yes, that was the case with the original amendment. There were some concerns that the amendment could be out of order due to that. My understanding is that the underlying infrastructure bill spends far more than the revenue it generates. So that sort of objection to the amendment would no longer be in order. I would just also say that there are a lot of member level negotiations happening now on potential new solutions that you probably see today that may not have necessarily been scored in the same way as of yet.
Great, Landon. And I get the sense that you're running around the Capitol Trying to find out some of these things. And this goes right to Cindy's question. Cindy had submitted a question. She had heard that there's a whip count in support of the Wyden Toomey Loomis amendment. Do you have an update on that? Is it possible to get an update on that at some point? What are your thoughts?
We've only really seen momentum increase for the Wyden Loomis Toomey amendment. I think a lot of people, including sponsors of the other amendment, have seen where the flaws are in the current text and what needs to be fixed. I think they've seen that from early on as well and agreed. I think Senator Portman put out a tweet several days ago saying we should have a vote on this measure. So we were pretty confident if it were to come up for vote that it would garner significant support and pass. And just based on my conversations and my actual running around that I've been doing, I think you could see even a broader consensus emerge today.
Great, thank you, Landon. And I do want to welcome my old friend Jason Brett, who Landon, you know as well. He just joined our panel. Landon, we'd love to have you stay if you can. Feel free to. Panelists, any last questions for Landon? And Landon, again, it's a privilege to have you join us, and I'm looking forward to visiting in DC.
I appreciate the time as well. I do need to run around a bit more and try to help out with this cause, but I appreciate you guys holding this call and doing everything that you have been doing for this industry.
Thank you very much, Landon. Great to hear from you. We'll keep in touch soon. Keep us posted, and certainly we'll continue to help where we can.
Sounds great. Take care.
Bye-bye. Mr. Brett, welcome, sir.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. We kicked off at 9:30. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to some of the audience and attendees, and we did the first 5 to 10 minutes with Landon. He literally sounds like he's running through the halls on the Capitol. But if you wanted to introduce yourself to the attendees, Jason, that'd be great, and then we'll kick off.
I'm Jason Brett. I am a board advisor for the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance. I've been about 25 years in financial markets. I was a former regulator at the FDIC during the financial crisis in 08-09. And I've been in the blockchain and crypto business since 2016.
Thank you, sir. And I think we all communicated by email kind of the bullet points of this global member call. So we're going to cover a wide variety of topics. Landon spoke to some of the provisions that were in the original amendment. And I want to start there. And obviously, he didn't have the opportunity to dive more deeply into that. I'd like to do that a little bit if we could. What's this bipartisan legislation, and what's buried in there that made the entirety of the crypto ecosystem lose their minds? Actually, Jason, can we start with you on that?
Sure. Yeah, I've been. It's been kind of busy all weekend. In April of this year, there was a hearing with Senator Rob Portman and Charles Rettig, the IRS commissioner, and other senators, and this issue was raised up that they believe there's issues in the reporting, proper reporting of all taxes in crypto. That's because the IRS has identified that there's people they believe in this industry that are not paying their taxes. So Portman at the time talked about legislation that he would produce a bill to focus on improving the overall structure of collecting taxes in our industry. In May, the Treasury made recommendations saying that they believe there should be a legislation to focus on this issue as well. And what it looks like has happened is they've inserted it as an offset in the infrastructure bill. So the infrastructure bill is what President Biden and the administration consider one of their most highest priorities. There hasn't been a infrastructure since forever in this country in terms of building bridges and roads. And so one of the offsets is 28 billion of tax revenue they believe they can collect for over 10 years if they feel they can get better reporting, information reporting, not collecting taxes, just reporting on the activities in this industry, which the IRS commissioner has basically said is opaque. So what happened over the weekend was this was identified by the crypto industry that it was part of this bill. It was people realize this is a must-pass bill, so there might be language made there. You have to get an amendment to fix the language or strike it out. Senator Ted Cruz tried to strike out the amendment. That was his position point, but Senator Cruz, it was a good idea. Unfortunately, that would have killed the whole bill. because it has to be an offset. You have to have that money to pay for whatever you're building, even though the Congressional Budget Office has said this is going to create a deficit. So the two amendments, competing amendments you saw was first from the industry, which was the Lummis, Toomey, Wyden amendment. Ron Wyden was a Democrat, so it was a bipartisan amendment to attempt to fix the language in the bill to make sure there were exclusions about who would be a broker in IRS. The White House and Treasury came out with a competing amendment, and the competing amendment from Treasury, which the Washington Post identified a couple of days ago, has been to try to get rid of the some of the exclusions. So it's really a fight over what exclusions are going to be in what's very broad language as to who could be considered a broker. It is just tax reporting, and it would have the Treasury define what digital assets are. This is part of an overall program that, and it's just the beginning of what the White House and Treasury want to do as far as really putting their thumb on this industry and regulating it.
Jason, thanks for that. David, I want to go to you if we could, because Jason referenced a bunch of stuff that I think was really critical, both in the writing of the original proposed legislation as well as the potential amendment. And it really struck at the core of what we talk about when we say a broker. From your insight and your perspective, what's the legislation's perspective on who's a broker and why is that important?
Well, I've got the legislation right here. The original legislation says exactly this. Any person who, for consideration, is responsible for regularly providing any service effectuating transfers of digital assets on behalf of another person. That is really problematic because it ropes in software developers and miners, and really forces a burden on them that they can't meet, because once you are classified as a broker, then you have reporting requirements to the IRS that basically say that you have to report name, address, social security number, and amount of every single transaction. So taking that one step further, who is responsible for the reporting if you have 11,000 Bitcoin miners or Bitcoin nodes that process the same transaction? You are competing for consideration in that scenario, but at that point, even if they have the information, are all 11,000 nodes going to have to be required to report to the Treasury? And if they do, and I have a $500 Bitcoin transaction, is that now going to look like 500 times 11,000? It is completely unworkable, and that's the real issue with this, and it will drive mining activity offshore unless there then is a favorable Treasury ruling.
There is a certain irony there, David, as Chinese mining basically collapsed, and we kind of saw that moving potentially as an industry to the United States and others, and legislation like this might make that very problematic. Stephen, I want to move over to you because go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, sorry, go for it. Then I'll say
from a legal perspective, David touched on some of the considerations around what's a broker and why that's not workable. Are there privacy considerations? Are there legal considerations? You and I've had a lot of conversations about the legal framework for this ecosystem. What does this look like through your lens?
Well, first, I think it's important to point out, and I don't know if my understanding is that these rules will not go into effect without some rulemaking provision, that these aren't self-executing. So I was speaking to somebody over this weekend, very involved in this in Washington, who didn't want to say who he was for this, but he's like, doesn't understand why we're so worried about it. He said, because if you don't have the information, it's not going to make it past rulemaking. There needs to be a rulemaking provision here. So the question before of when it goes into effect, it does still, unless I'm wrong about this, it doesn't go into effect without rulemaking provisions. All of these provisions at all. And if we could show that we don't have the information, then I think there's definitely a chance there to water some of these down, at least for minors and things like that who really can't get the information. I'd be interested to hear what other people are thinking. I mean, I don't generally sharing with the government is not a privacy consideration if you actually have the information. I know we've been saying that a lot, but the government and the IRS does have a legal right to that. Do I love it? No, but it's not like a stable coin that I'm very worried about it as a model of privacy. I think here, if you have information that the IRS has a right to, it is pretty standard. Do I think it's good? No. Do I think it's against the ethos of so much of what we're working for? Yes, but I can't really say it's illegal.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. And David, as a follow-up, Mitchell, thank you for the comment. He said that, I won't read the whole thing, but according to 26 USC 6045, the term person includes any governmental unit and any agency or instrumentality thereof. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays into the dynamic of the proposed legislation as well. Amy, I want to pivot to you if we could, and then pull Sean into this portion of the conversation. Amy, I'm not an accountant by training, as you know, but you and I have had an extraordinary number of tax conversations. I want to look at the proposed legislation and some of the work that AICPA, which is we are proud to be partners of, has been doing around this tax perspective of crypto assets. Can you give us is an update available for some of the conversations, and what are your thoughts about how it's impacted by this legislation?
Absolutely, I can provide an update. I just wanted to first say what Stephen just mentioned about rulemaking. I have a comment on that, and I know because what we do at the AICPA, our team, Tax Policy and Advocacy, is we try to influence guidance or submit edits when there's proposed guidance that's available from the IRS. In terms of rulemaking, I think one of our fears, CPA's fears, is that how rulemaking works is it's all based on the intent of Congress. So right now, what we're seeing with these proposed bills is we're thinking, okay, what is the intent of the Wyden bill and what is the intent of the Portman bill? There's no clarity exactly who do they want to include or exclude from reporting. And that's very important because the next step after this, whichever bill or language is passed, usually there's a Joint Committee on Taxation, JCT Blue Book, and that Blue Book defines, Treasury works on it, and they say this is the intent of this bill. And that really kind of puts IRS into these restrictions because IRS is not supposed to make policy. It's whatever congressional policy comes out. And that's our fear is that, if this intent is that this group of people are supposed to be, they must have reporting, then IRS will say, okay, well, we're really hands tied and we're not here to make policy. But yeah, so that's what we've been concerned with on our membership side. And just an update, we've been following very closely, and I think we've tried to share with people that we have in contact with in Congress that our perspective is we thought the rewrite by Wyden, Toomey, Loomis was a significant improvement in defining brokers and pulling out miners and software providers who participate in the verification process. But we told them we hope they would consider excluding from the definition other persons who effectuate transfers of digital assets. And one example we gave them was, because we know that depending on who you're talking to, they might not have an understanding of how complicated this is. So one example we gave them was credit card companies providing rewards in the form of virtual currency and companies rewarding microtaskers with virtual currency. Do you intend for those to be included, excluded? And one of our biggest recommendations for whichever draft bill is to go through is we say, don't require cost basis reporting at this time due to its complexity and the need for authoritative administrative guidance, because we don't have proper guidance from Treasury or the IRS right now on exactly how to report and calculate cost basis. And without that guidance, how are you going to go require reporting? And we also actually just said to them, we kind of created a date in the future. And we said, alternatively, if you say basis reporting is required, we recommend it goes into effect no earlier than December 31st, 2027, to allow Treasury the time to develop that authoritative guidance on how to properly report for cost basis on virtual currency assets.
Amy, that reminds me that you and I have been having why doesn't IRS put forward authoritative guidance since 2014, if I remember correctly, which is the same.
We said to them, go look at those IRS FAQs on the internet. That's not authoritative guidance. You just say, oh, use FIFO, use this specific identification, but that's not authoritative guidance.
Right. Amy, thanks.
So would you say that we're better off with an agreed amendment to give some legislative intent, even if it doesn't in the end get approved?
I don't know what the best answer is, but I think what will sometimes happen is whichever bill goes through, they'll have they'll put a record on when they go through the vote during that time, they'll say, oh, we want this on the record. And someone will say, okay, this is intended for this, or that you can add in all these specifications to further provide clarity to the bill. And we hope that just whichever bill goes through, whichever one goes through, provide that clarity so that we know what it is. And another issue that we have is that we believe in, AICPA has good principles of tax policy. And two of the major principles of good tax policy is simplicity and certainty. And what this bill as drafted right now is not providing is certainty.
Amy, this is Jason Brett. Yesterday, Senator Portman gave clarity on what the intent was of the bill, and he's putting it in the legislative record. What he said was that the concern that's been expressed in the crypto industry who are not brokers could be inadvertently caught up in this definition. The Treasury Department, Nonpartisan Congressional Joint Committee on Taxation, and others believe that the current language is clear and that the reporting requirements only cover brokers. But he said, but his view is to clarify that the given potential for confusion on an extremely important issue. And then he put in the legislative record. In particular, we want to be sure miners and stakers and others now or in the future who play a key role by validating transactions, or sellers of hardware or software for digital wallets, or node operators or others who are not brokers, are clearly exempted. And then he said he would go on to attempt to provide further clarity. So as far as this senator's concerned, he feels like it's very clear. There is no question about it. And it's in the congressional record on the floor of the Senate as of yesterday as to who this is supposed to apply to. This is all happening really fast. I don't know if that changes your calculus at all about how this bill is coming out of Congress.
Absolutely. That's really helpful to know. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, and and I'm sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead, David.
Also, one of the issues is, which is why I brought it up, the JCT score actually went down with the amendment, which means that there is there was some intent to rope those parts of the industry into it in the first place. And the second thing is the IRS looks first to the plain language of the bill when they're doing their rulemaking, as well as the tax courts, and it's extremely difficult to go against the plain language of a bill or of a statute and argue intent behind it, especially if it says exactly what it says, which is providing any service effectuating transfers. So that's my take on it, is that regardless of what Portman says, the plain language of the bill, and the JCT right now agrees with the plain language of the bill, that if you exclude minors, the JCT score goes down.
David, I want to stop there for one moment. I just want to invite Mitchell Kopelman to join us because he had some really good comments as a follow-on, Amy, to your commentary about cost basis. Mitchell, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Sorry for being invisible, but I think that's my status in this webinar. But Amy, you had some great comments about the 1099 reporting, and for years I've been talking to clients about when they're going to have to do this 1099 reporting. So I'm not surprised to see it finally show up in some piece of legislation. We have to remember that when the brokerage industry was first required to report 1099s, they only reported sales transactions. That's all they had to report. They didn't report cost basis for decades, probably. And now, even in the world of in the brokerage world, when they have to report sales, if the asset wasn't purchased on their platform and sold on their platform, they only have to report sales. They don't have any cost basis reporting obligations today. And so that's just another layer of complexity. But to think historically, I don't know how many decades, but it was decades before the cost basis ended up being reported by brokerage. I mean, it's got to be at least 30 or 40 years before, between the point in time when 1099 sale transactions were first reported. So just something to think about, and we'll see what the IRS actually does and what Congress does. But I was actually, to some extent, happy that they didn't have reporting due until after 2023, so that at least there's some time to get this up and running. We've been talking about it with our clients for probably 3 or 4 years, like this is coming. We just don't know when. But that's it.
Yeah, thank you, Mitchell. Really, really do appreciate it. And Jason, I know you've been posting some stuff to the chat for the host and panelists. Is that you want to read off some of that?
No, it was just for Amy's reference and for everyone's reference as to what Senator Portman said that I had read. And also just, I think an important point to make is that while it is just what Senator Portman has said, it is what he's saying is backed by the Joint Committee on Taxation. And also his position is a little bit limited as to what he can do. Even the Washington Post yesterday said all the work on this has faded like a meme stock. So the senators are quickly lost interest in this whole subject. And they believe that this is basically the best that they can do, because at this point, you would need an amendment process that could potentially slow down or kill this entire infrastructure bill. So there's larger politics at play. It's not right or fair, obviously, that this is within this legislation, but it's what we have to work with. So right now, this is to get unanimous consent at this point, and the debate would mean every single senator would have to agree to change the language. So the original language that's in there that everyone agrees is bad and not well defined, along with what Portman said on the floor, is very likely all that you were going to have to work with on this bill.
Right. Jason, thanks for that. We lost Sean due to technical difficulties. Hopefully he joins us soon. I did want to give the stage to another member who participates in a lot of these conversations, and I always really look forward to his commentary. Matt, you had some commentary that you posted. I'd love to get your perspectives.
Yeah, I was just echoing kind of what Jason and David said on legislative intent. I'm rolling back in time to, CARES Act, beginning of the pandemic. And, as we watched a lot of that bill text and intent and things play out, in particular, if you look at some of the carve outs for credit loss accounting, and how those were applied by the Securities Exchange Commission or others versus, what might have been in, comments on the floor or, statements of record or things around that with different members of Congress, kind of stating, what their intent was for how some of those things should work. I think it's exactly right that, they generally apply a process, which is to start with the plain text and then consult their agencies legal about how far outside of the plain text they can do, going into intent and other items. And so just, it does get messy at times, is really all that I would point out with, my historical experience.
Matt, great. Thanks so much. I want to pivot the conversation as well. David, I wanted to ask you, you've been pretty deeply involved in the conversations in Wyoming. And I was hoping to talk about some of the perspectives from what I'll call it a technology and business level. We have this kind of broad conversations about legislation, proposed amendments, and taxation. One of the things that we see often is at almost a UX level or the implementation level. How would things like this be enforced? How would things like this be captured? And are we also talking about something that we all spoke about earlier this year, hosted and unhosted wallet concerns as well? Is that something you can speak to? Do you have any perspective on that, particularly with the work you've done in Wyoming?
Well, I don't have a huge perspective on that. What I can say is, excuse me, as soon as the final language is passed, then what we will need to sit down and do as a state and as an accounting firm is work with attorneys looking at the language to see, is there any play? How can it play here? How can we mold our advice to around all of this to keep business here in Wyoming and here in the United States in particular? I am seeing with that word "any," which is an all-encompassing word, I am seeing a real problem with trying to figure out leeway within this language to exclude anybody in the industry that performs that service. So, but that's generally the way we look at it within the state. is, what can we do to affect a way to keep miners on shore, keep developers on shore. And certainly the state of Wyoming would like to keep them within the state, but in general, for me to be able to provide advice to all of my clients within this arena too.
Great, thank you, David. I think we have Sean back as well. Stephen, I wanted to pivot to you. You and I have a lot of legal conversations. You're a core member of our legal working group. Can you talk a little bit about the client perspective? You've got a lot of clients in this space. What are their concerns around how some of this legislation develops? What are you telling them, or are you able to tell them from the perspective of how to prepare for what this kind of regulatory landscape looks like?
Well, I think at this stage, it's too early to prepare for something like that. I mean, the legislation has to go into place, and then there, regardless of how limited it will be or not, there is a rulemaking provisions. I think we have to expect that as a general matter, this industry is going to be more regulated, whether between this happening as well as the SEC getting much more active. And I think there is somewhat of a chance that this will lead to somewhat of greater regulatory clarity in all elements of this industry. But at this stage, we have to try to clarify and make this rule as good as possible, assuming it happens. It's too early to actually give advice, I think, about what to do other than just prepare for a more regulatory intensive landscape. I don't think miners at this stage need to do anything different or necessarily flee the country, but we are moving into a regulatory, a much more regulatory focus, which, look, the positive side is it's a sign of maturity of the industry. The fact that, I mean, people are waking up to the industry in this way gives it definitely not too big to fail, but it gives this a level of permanence that I think we could only imagine not that long ago.
We're far away from the days where politicians were saying that it's too small an industry, we don't care, and it's only for purchasing drugs online. It's a very different tempo of conversation. I do want to give the floor a little bit to Sean.
It's such a little space between thinking you're about to disappear to wanting your money, but I guess most things in life are that way.
Exactly. I want to give some airtime to Sean. Sean, we've got you back on audio. I wanted to open up that conversation for you as well. You do a lot of education in the space. You do a lot of public speaking in the space, and you advise and work with providers across different perspectives. What are your thoughts on the challenges of some of the things that legislation like this would require from a reporting perspective? And you and I have had complex conversations around data quality and things like that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so probably the top 2 or 3 thoughts that I've had and that I've been talking to people over the weekend is that, one, all of this is a excellent sort of opening bid, but that trying to get the crypto sort of legal outlook is going to be a uphill battle. I believe Matt actually dropped it in the actual chat earlier, and also David also sort of talked on this too, that ultimately it is going to be up to how the actual bill in any form, right, ultimately passed, is actually going to be enforced, right, by the Treasury, IRS, and other sort of policy actors out there. So probably the biggest comment that I've been trying to make is that, yes, I'd say over the last 10 or so days, right, the SEC chairman, all of this, it really has sort of been the first time that the crypto space has been really on the front burner, right, from a policy point of view. Obviously the IRS and the whole alphabet soup gang have been interested in crypto, but always from a more sort of niche point of view, either enforcement, compliance, and all the rest. But actually, over the last 2 or so weeks, it really has quickly become a front burner, hot button issue for everybody in any sort of policy angle. And so then too, in terms of actually how to take this into account for any sort of reporting plans, I mean, it really is too early, right? Because all of this is still in a draft phase. And obviously, while the bill itself is a must-pass bill, how that ultimately plays out in terms of, okay, fine, what the actual specific obligations are going to be for this whole array of actors out there, it's just too early to actually know. Yeah. And so the best piece of advice that I've been trying to give anybody that I've been talking to on these issues is to, one, obviously be aware of them, two, try to help in a productive manner, and then three, ultimately how it actually comes out and the ultimate impacts of it aren't going to be felt right away, because even in the actual bill itself, the enforcement timeline, I believe, which was highlighted earlier, is 2023, and there are other groups out there like Amy and her team who would actually outline dates even 27, 28. So it's ultimately going to take a while for the impact of this, and I'm sure the other policy talks going on right now to ultimately have an impact on the marketplace.
Sean, thanks so much. I want to offer up a question. Cindy, thanks for the questions. And for our attendees, please feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A. But Cindy pointed out something, a question for the panel. Do you see many crypto players moving offshore? And if so, which types? And I just want to open up that for the panel. We see new types of firms forming all the time. We see firms, we can go into deep conversation about Shapeshift going entirely decentralized. Any thoughts? Anything going to go overseas? And should we be concerned about the types that would move? No one's going overseas. Okay, fair enough. Jason, I wanted to move to you if we could. You are an advisor to the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance. You chair the Value Technology Foundation, which we're proud to be partners of. You and I have been having these conversations for a long, long time. Do you want to talk a little bit about VTF's perspective on some of these things, and maybe a couple of comments on where that's evolving from the work you do as well around the legislation and what needs to happen in Congress?
Well, so Value Technology Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit that is not in the business of lobbying Congress. We work on think tank concepts, and our thinking on the tax has been very much aligned with what others in the industry have been saying for some time, and also a lot of the work you've been doing with the AICPA and Amy has been fantastic. There really has not just been clear guidance on taxes for some time. And obviously, there is a point in time at which it makes sense to introduce smart tax policy for a budding industry. So to your point, people don't even think about going overseas. Our main criticism is that this is not the way that this administration and Congress should be handling the tax provisions for something that you have been in this industry for years. David's been working in Wyoming. There's been so many people for years that in a matter of a days, because of the sentiment that there needs to be sort of a little bit of a quote unquote crackdown on crypto based on a new administration, is not, you don't want to be making it under these kinds of conditions. And so the biggest hope I would have would be that somehow this would disappear, right? So we wouldn't have sort of a badly worded language. But the advice we have for basically in our prescription for White House and Congress on making policy in this area is to make it crystal clear to those who are good players in the ecosystem on how they're supposed to file their taxes without harming innovation. And at the same time, make sure that those who are bad actors not paying their taxes, whether you're a waitress at a restaurant or CEO of a corporation, you should have a way to report it and you should be paying your taxes. And if not, that's where the IRS's enforcement should come in. We shouldn't be leaning into the enforcement angle as if all of us are not paying our taxes.
But one of the things, Jason, and I want to open this up for the rest of the panel there as well, and we share that same position, that reasonable and correct enforcement to make sure that everyone's paying their taxes and that proper tracking is done. But I really do get the sense from the broader regulatory players, IRS, SEC, CFTC, and I think it's bled into the legislature, is it's rulemaking by enforcement. And it seems to really have become part of the genetic makeup of how they're approaching crypto. I want to open up to the panel. Is that the case? And how easily will that change? It's really legislation or regulation by enforcement. And we see that over and over again. And from an industry perspective, that's a bit concerning. It seems like getting used to doing it that way. Comments, questions? Do you all see the same perspective?
And I want to kind of ask this to Jason. I mean, how do you, and I think you kind of half answered this already, but how do you respond to people in Washington or outside of the industry say, yeah, you're right that the tax provisions make it very difficult, but really the crypto world just wants to be in some totally offshore place and not pay any taxes at all. And I've gotten this question, be honest with me, how much of your subjection is that you just don't want to pay your taxes? And you don't want, you want to be, you talk about being offshore, you talk about without being in any country, how much of it is that? And how do you respond to that?
Well, the way I usually talk there is I think that this is such a new industry, it's hard to figure out the education that's required for the people that are involved. So also asking our senators and others and people to try to take a step back and think about how challenging this is to figure out. You know, I say that there are bad actors in every environment, and that's when we saw the internet started. We had that as well. However, we didn't stop the internet in its tracks because we had a few bad actors in the ecosystem. You know, I think that there is still a comfort level anytime there's something new in a country of people trying to get used to it. And also people just don't understand or have discomfort about sort of the coding. That's why I think there's been this question about software developers. And also, if you think about it, Stephen, all the different types of new lines of business that we come up with, right? DeFi, NFT, you know, it does appear at times like maybe this is being set up in a way to avoid the conventional reporting for taxes. But what I argue to them is, maybe it's the IRS that can work to modernize in terms of understanding what is the proper reporting. How do you want to make sure you're collecting the proper amount of taxes? I think that the tax, the way the tax has been done in this industry, to this industry now for years has been terrible because we tax people on every transaction that they have in Bitcoin or Ethereum or anything. So you move one small amount and it's a taxable event. We've worked hard to get de minimis, you know, that's been talked about by Coin Center and others, so that a certain amount doesn't get taxed. But Stephen, I think that it's time for, there has to be some bending to wherever the market goes. So just like we all moved to the internet, everyone came up with ways for reporting and doing what we need to do on the internet. TurboTax, you know, you can do your taxes on the internet now. I think people are going to have to move toward crypto in this country and understand that this is sort of the new way people are going to be doing their finances.
David, I wanted to give you some airtime as well. I did see your chat, but did you want to weigh in here as well?
Oh, just on the offshore question, people moving offshore, I truly believe that it's not going to create mass flight immediately. It depends on where the Treasury lands in its rulemaking initially, and also some of the case law that comes down, which will be at least a couple, 3-4 years down the line. But if Treasury poorly crafts their rules, then we will almost certainly see miners move offshore. A lot of developers move, blockchain developers move offshore, and with that goes venture capital, and you know, it creates a cascade effect for the industry within the United States. So again, I don't see everyone packing up, all the miners packing up their operations and going offshore immediately, because of some of the intent that Portman has illustrated. I think there will be a wait and see attitude, but and also Treasury, a lot of times their rulemaking when it goes into effect it'll be for all open periods. That'll be really difficult if they don't create effective dates themselves, because if it's for all open periods and it goes back, the reporting requirement goes backwards, that's going to be a real difficult issue too. So I think Treasury needs to look at this very carefully and craft very, very carefully their language.
David, thank you. Sean, I know you had some commentary as well. Let me give you the floor for a few moments, and we do have some Q&A coming in as well. Attendees, certainly please continue to submit your questions, but Sean, go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and probably the only extra comment that I had here is that it really isn't so much is this rule X or is this policy B going to cause firms to pack up and go offshore. I would say that actually the opposite is true. That in order to try to, one, keep, and two, try to encourage new firms to actually come here, fund operations here, have the capital come here, that the outlook has to be, I would say, at the absolute baseline, it has to be transparent, and it has to be consistent in terms of both how the rules are ultimately written and how they're ultimately in force also. So,
Sean, thanks for that. And Mitchell just submitted a comment. And I'd be interested because Jason, and I'd like the others to see if we can push back a little bit on this perspective, but he raised an interesting point. A crypto investor recently told him that they should not, they didn't think they should pay tax on their income. They thought they were special for making money in crypto. And Mitchell explained that that's not any different from someone who purchased Tesla low and sold it high. If that's taxable, so should crypto. I don't think there's any reason for there to be a de minimis amount as Jason suggested. And I've heard this conversation point a couple of times from colleagues. Anyone agree with that perspective? Or Jason, you want to push back a little bit on that?
I'm not sure why we would want, I think the burden of the IRS to actually try to track every transaction down to the penny might actually cost more than the collection of such taxes. By agreeing that it shouldn't be moved down, we're agreeing that the IRS should be able to say that this is treated as property and not as currency. You know, one of the things people have to realize is that the tax reporting is the most important thing. And I think that it's fair to say that while we're talking about infrastructure like roads and bridges, if we don't get some kind of a better tax treatment for these cryptocurrencies and for blockchains to be able to flourish and survive, particularly when developers are sending less than a penny in terms of their coins back and forth to them, that will be devastating to the infrastructure of the United States come 20 years from now. So I would push back on that.
Yeah, and I was going to echo what Jason said. One of our AICPA recommendations, and it's just on a small piece of the de minimis aspect, we do have an official recommendation, and it's the need for de minimis election. And we did actually send that over to congressional staffers who've been working on this bill. We said Congress should allow de minimis exclusion for virtual currency, similar to the exclusion allowed for foreign currency transactions. Tracking small amounts of gain or loss on a transaction of low value creates a situation where the administrative costs outweigh any possible tax on the immaterial transaction. So it's exactly what Jason said. And also one of two important things is, you know, I mentioned certainty and simplicity, but also the effective tax administration piece. We believe that when you're creating policy, you really need to think, can the tax system be easily administered by the government, and can it induce compliance by all individuals? Is enforcement costly? Can some individuals successfully avoid their legal liabilities? These are all considerations you have to think about when you're creating policy. And I think also, Jason mentioned this earlier, one of the biggest issues we see is that the individuals who are tasked to work on this guidance don't necessarily have the same level of knowledge and expertise as those working in the industry. And I don't know what that will take on the side of the government to either create some sort of education, mentoring, something in the beginning when they're hiring these people, because they need to, policy is not moving at the speed of technology.
Right. Amy, thanks so much for that. I want to invite Mike Sullivan. The questions are long and complicated in the Q&A. So Mike, did you want to express your question to the panel?
Sure. The whole concept that you have to pay the income, you know, for mining and staking as soon as it's received versus when it's sold. I really feel that that's not fair for multiple reasons. And you know, I'm just wondering, you know, where is that going with people's mindset of trying to get that changed? I mean, think about it, you know, if you go and you know, the thing about if you're mining gold, do you pay as soon as you like collect all that gold from the mine at the time that it comes into the company, or do you pay when you sell that gold, put it out into the marketplace?
Believe you pay
Mike,
when
this
you
is
mine it.
Jason. I think that, sorry, Stephen.
Okay, maybe I was just gonna say, I believe that for gold and diamonds, you do pay when you mine them.
I was going to say that I believe, and Sean or Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, the IRS guidance on mining right now is, I think there's 2 different categories. You can be like a hobbyist miner where you don't have to do that. But if you're like in the business of doing it, then yes, I believe that it's as you get in your income, it has to be taxed. But I'm not a tax expert, so I don't know what exactly the requirement is. And I would say just conceptually, that makes a lot of sense, because you are acquiring this through your efforts, and maybe not right away, maybe over a period of time at some point. But that's a great question, and that hits to the heart of the matter of, when do we have to either report and when do you have to pay taxes on? And I think that's again left to the tax experts on the panel.
Jason, thanks. I want to go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Just quick on my part. The value, it is accepted across all industries that when you get paid, you mark the value of that payment as you receive it, and that's what you pay tax on, regardless of whether you're getting paid in Bitcoin, whether you're getting paid in gold. If that's the medium of exchange you're using, that's something that I had not expected the IRS to waiver from with cryptocurrency.
David, thanks. I did bring a couple of other our colleagues to the stage who had questions. Joey, you had a bunch of them, so I just wanted to give you the mic to express your questions directly to the panel if we could. And then Rod, I'd like to queue you up as well.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Appreciate it. I mean, my main, concern, and we've beaten this, beaten this dead horse multiple times, is just overall going back to utilizing the medium of exchange, right? I mean, I'm currently, working for a business where 99.9% of the payments that I facilitate every single day are through crypto, whether that's utilizing stable coins, utilizing any ERC20 token, et cetera. And we're a global company. So I'm paying people in Switzerland, I'm paying people in France, I'm paying people in Australia, et cetera. The ease of transaction of it is the beauty of this, right? And being able to just send a payment to somebody in 2 seconds, anybody in the world. Now that I'm doing this every single day and paying people in crypto every single day, the tax burden on businesses like me that are global and utilizing crypto every single day is insane. And it's like, how do we enable businesses like mine? That's a global company. We have 50 employees across the world, Australia, India, Europe, America, Canada, et cetera. How do we enable us to utilize crypto on the back end, perform all of our operations using crypto, but not, burden us with the tax reporting, et cetera, that comes with it? And we talk about de minimis, right? You can have de minimis, and that may help a little bit, but maybe and we've talked about this probably, multiple times on a lot of the previous webinars I've been on, is if you're classifying certain cryptos and say, okay, these cryptos aren't subject to specific cost basis reporting, if you're talking about stable coins, et cetera, or you're using some sort of CBDC. I mean, in my opinion, it kind of goes back to that. That's the easiest solve the problem use case. If we're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole and say, okay, we had these old regulatory classifications of security, currency, et cetera. So let's fit some of these existing cryptos into these buckets, and then that'll help clarify, I think, some of these tax issues. But I mean, what are your guys' thoughts on that? Because again, from somebody who's operating crypto every single day, this becomes just, a regulatory and financial nightmare for us, where it almost becomes unusable. And again, it drives that innovation outside the US, as the senator yesterday was talking about, that Anthony Pompliano retweeted. It drives that innovation outside the US because nobody wants to deal with this.
Thank you, Joey. Any commentary from the panel?
Well, first off, Joey, I want to tell you that I feel your pain. That is a comment that is near and dear to my heart, because now I deal with clients that deal with those same issues as you. The US has a very long history of forcing businesses to be tax collectors, basically, for them. And unfortunately, I don't see that changing anytime soon. When you're looking at cross-border transactions, it gets even worse because you have different reporting requirements in every single country that you're dealing in. And the only way to change any of that from a US perspective is to change how we deal with the tax treaties. And when it takes 5 to 10 years to negotiate a single tax treaty with another country, we're in for a long haul here in trying to get some of that changed. So I feel your pain, and I'm not sure I can offer any way to tell you that pain can't be or can be alleviated, but just know that there are a lot of people in your circumstance as well. So I apologize for not being able to help in any way on that front.
David, thanks. I do want to give the stage also. Rod, you had a great question, which I accidentally deleted. I'm really sorry, but if you wanted to chat with the panelists and ask your question or comment, that'd be great.
Yeah, just real quick. I was just thinking, because in the research that we do with Luca and with the Rutgers University and others on valuation and providing services to some of these decentralized exchanges or DeFi, do we have any ideas that might support our case with this incredibly new technology by giving the regulators some ideas of other creative alternatives to collecting tax from some of these organizations, such as a DeFi? They're off the grid. They're, but whether it's self-reporting of some kind or some kind of, maybe we'd help our case if we offered some ideas of how you would collect taxes from some of these very decentralized mechanisms, protocols, or networks. So just a thought.
Thanks, Rod. Panel, any comments?
I think that's good thinking. And I think that goes along the lines of what the previous question was asking. And I think that's why WSBA is such a great resource, because I think there's the line of thought, again, like I was saying before, is this is where the market is moving, right? With someone dealing in cryptocurrency every day, we have decentralized finance in action, but it's not fitting into our current system. So I think that there needs to be a spark of creativity amongst the regulators in terms of understanding that if you have cryptocurrency being used in monetary exchange, maybe there's a way of understanding what that is. And unfortunately, that's a really big issue that's going to require a lot of discussion with policymakers, because there's this idea of defending the US dollar. So anyone that's just working purely in cryptocurrencies is hard for them to get their head around. And the Federal Reserve has a lot of push about what that is. And the Federal Reserve and the White House together also have concerns that I think is fair to say go beyond just the reporting piece for something like DeFi. I think that there's an underlying assumption that was clear from what White House came out with in their initial exemptions that specifically did not exempt DeFi, that there's concerns about money laundering and other possibilities. So this goes back to just what sounds boring after a while, but it goes back to the education you get from these panelists, maybe working together to try to develop white papers to help share these ideas. I think these are all really tenable ideas that have been long in the making, not so much for DeFi, but particularly for if we start using cryptocurrency as currency in everyday transactions, how are our regulators and public servants going to work with us on that? But DeFi does need some help in terms of it's understood, I think, within some parts of the government as something they believe could be really a big black hole for money laundering. So that needs to be addressed as well.
Jason, thanks. Stephen, did you have a comment? And I want to piggyback off of what Jason said. And then Kel, I asked Kel to the stage. He had a great point as well. But Stephen, go ahead.
Just back to Jason and the rest of the panel. In terms of this education, is the rule, in terms of what we can do, is the rule-making provision here, for those more active in Washington, an opportunity for us and other organizations, now that the IRS or the Treasury will be looking at the tax provisions here, I don't think they're going to be setting up a new tax, but a chance to open up and get some other things into this rulemaking, or will it be very limited to this bill?
Again, the IRS is not my forte, but if you look at FinCEN, they have a lot of public-private partnerships. So I think it'd be very natural at this point that if there isn't already, the IRS and maybe with AICPA and others, and maybe WSBA could be instrumental in helping to create some dialogue with the commissioner and IRS to help work with industry. I think they're always looking for information. So I think that is an opportunity for sure. Again, this is one major piece that affects the industry, but one small piece of what I think you can prepare yourself to understand that it's going to cover a lot of different areas coming out of the administration over the next several months, both in the congressional level and from the administration. So this is sort of just the first of many concepts that the more proactive we are with educating people in the field, the better off the industry will be.
Thank you, Jason. Stephen, go ahead, Stephen. I'm sorry.
It's worth it to point out that we don't, in terms of other methods of taxation, we don't have a VAT tax, which in some ways, as much as we think the US is complicated, the rest of the world makes businesses collect a big portion of their taxes the other way. But on the other hand, that gives another bite at the apple that the IRS doesn't have in the US.
Stephen, thanks. I want to give Kel the virtual stage for a couple of moments. Kel, can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can. You had some good comments, and it's always great chatting with you, my friend. What's your perspective?
I just wanted to mention there was a question earlier on around the treatment of staking rewards in terms of the applicability of when it is taxed. And I just want to mention that there's some great things that have been done by the Proof of Stake Alliance, as well as a professor of tax law in Virginia, I believe it is, Abe Sutherland. So we've actually helped participate in that. I know there's other people. There's an ongoing lawsuit regarding the treatment of staking rewards, particularly around, using, staking to secure the blockchain network, and the fact that it's not necessarily a payment, but it is newly created rewards. And there's aspects of that discussion. So if you can go to stakingtax.com and read the paper around that. That was the original paper that was done in collaboration with our company, Verity, and a couple of others. And again, there is an ongoing lawsuit around that treatment that's going on right now with, I believe, a test case couple that were Tezos farmers in Nashville. And that is currently ongoing and could potentially change that. Just want to mention that.
Kel, thanks very much. And for members, we can share that link. We've shared it previously as well. So Kel, thanks again. Amy, I want to address the next question that came in to you or your perspective. It's from Mitchell again. Mitchell, thanks so much. Backup withholding has to be on the IRS's mind with reporting of transactions. You agree, Amy?
I'm sure it is. I don't know in terms, if you look at the guidance that's available from the IRS, I'm not sure if they will be able to, how long it will take before they're able to implement something like that.
Thank you, Amy. A couple more questions are coming in. James, a couple of comments actually. Jim Perillo, it's also not clear how to source staking rewards. It's incredibly complex and nuanced, which makes the education component part of this even scarier for folks like us, but it's a good point as well. I want to start wrapping up a little bit, and we've got about 15 minutes left or so. We do have a couple more questions. Michael Fasinello, I'm going to actually bring Michael to the stage. You got a lot of good comments here. It's probably easier for you to speak them than it is for me to read them. Bear with me. Michael, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me okay?
We can indeed. Please, your question or comment for the panel.
Yeah, so basically just in regard to one of the panelists mentioned about change with the industry, and FinCEN is holding a ransomware exchange this week. I believe it's on the 12th on addressing the use of crypto as payment for ransomware actions and things like that. So I'm expecting crypto to come up in large part during that conversation. Sadly, I don't think it'll be as in-depth or in the nature that we like it to be given the current regulation, or the current considerations on tax obligations and things like that. I'll be at the meeting, so I'll certainly try to bring up some of these issues as well, but it's largely going to be based on the avoidance of using crypto, as a payment ransomware events.
Yep. Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate it. Let us know the feedback, and if we could do anything to support or help that, please do let us know.
Thanks for having me.
Yep, absolutely. I want to throw one question out for the panel, and it really, I'm kind of conflating a couple of things here, but when we talk about this legislative perspective, when we look at regulatory perspectives, I think we all had seen SEC Chair Gensler's commentary earlier in the week as well, or was it last week? It's all starting to blur at the Aspen Institute. And the phrase we heard a lot was national security in the context of crypto and blockchain. I know I'm digressing a little bit from the kind of mission of the working group here, but I think it's relevant. Jason, David, Amy, are you all seeing that perspective as well? And what is that? What is this national security perspective that folks like Gensler in DC are throwing up a lot?
So the national security is not anything that's new. Since prior to the Facebook Libra introduction, which people probably remember from 2019, the previous administration was dealing with Venezuela that was talking about specifically using cryptocurrency to evade sanctions in the Chavez regime. And they had already started thinking and looking at it from the viewpoint of how the cryptocurrencies might be used by nation states that aren't friendly to us to evade those sanctions. So when Facebook hit the scene in 2019, it only further created the dialogue and the conversation around concerns of what might happen offshore with crypto. We Value Technology Foundation, we have contracts with U.S. government where we help supply information and education around some of these areas that they've been thinking about. So what I would say is that at the end of the day, right now, and I'd love to hear what the other panelists think, this has sort of been an ongoing development about what the national security could be and how we might be impacted without the ability of the global reserve currency being the US dollar and the way we conduct foreign policy now. It's a real challenge.
Jason, thanks. Any other comments on that from the panelists? And we'll start with our last couple of questions to wrap up. Sean, go ahead.
I would just add there that probably that whole national security angle that is more and more being sort of trotted out as a reason to increase some of the oversight over certain crypto transactions isn't really linked to, I'd say, crypto at all, but it is more linked to echoing on the earlier point raised that the US dollar is able to be circumvented, and that if there are other forms of doing business, other forms of doing transactions that are easier, faster, cheaper, and are not under the oversight of the US government, that there is a appetite for that elsewhere in the world.
Sean, thanks so much. Appreciate it. Any last questions that we don't get to? If anyone wants to email those, we'll share them with the panelists as well. I want to give all of our panelists, and thank you all so much for this. Really appreciate the perspective. Thank you all for the great questions. I want to give each of the panelists a couple of moments as far as your closing commentary. And I want to end off for all of us with a prediction, which I usually never do on these calls. But Stephen, let's start with you. Any last thoughts, any last comments? What are you seeing in the next few hours, next couple of days? And how do you want to leave off?
Basically just that I think the rulemaking is where there's going to be more opportunity than we think here. And this is nothing urgent. So don't panic and leave the country yet unless you want to leave anyway.
Stephen, thanks. Amy, how about you?
I think the most important thing from a CPA perspective is definitely the delay in cost reporting. So we will be continuing to emphasize that and hoping that it's delayed because it's too complex and there's no guidance at the moment.
I'm going to be on a lot more tax conversations with you, aren't I, Amy, in the future? Is that I'm looking forward to it. David, how about yourself?
Please don't give up the fight. It's call your senators today. Leave messages, post to social media. It has an effect. It's had a huge effect so far. And as a group, we are a lot more powerful than we used to be, and we wield as long as we effectively wield that power, we can create change, even if it means maybe not winning this battle, but doing a housekeeping amendment or change in the near future. The Congress always passes housekeeping amendments right at the end of the year to these statutes, and keep pushing forward as a group to make sure that the treatment is correct.
David, thank you. Jason, last closing comments?
I would agree wholeheartedly with what David said. I think that it's important for everyone to remember that this is the first time the White House has actually spoken on cryptocurrency and blockchain, and have actually taken a position as far as how it should be in pending legislation that could become law within a matter of a week or two. And that we've seen mainstream coverage of it at the Washington Post. We have 7 or 8 senators talking about this. So we should understand that it really is important that we all stick together, because we better, whether we're ready for prime time or not, this is the moment that we've now been moved into the spotlight.
Jason, thanks so much. And finally, Sean, let's wrap it up from a commentary perspective with you. And then I've got a prediction question for our panel.
Yeah, sure thing. So probably the only other comment that I would add onto the other comments here is that it really is a clear indication of, one, how much progress we've all made, right, in terms of blockchain, crypto being really more and more part of the mainstream conversation. Although having that be the fact is not always a excellent thing, but it's more important for us to try to help policymakers get the rules right up front, as opposed to having to try to fix it later on.
Sean, thanks so much. Last question, predictions based on what we know now, and I'm not looking at the news right now, so I don't know, but what is your prediction? Does the amendment go in with its original language, or does the Wyden proposed amendment make it in? Stephen, prediction.
And this one, I'll be pessimistic and say no, but that I totally agree with David and everyone else that we should still push, and that this is a real statement of strength of the industry, regardless of what happens.
Thank you, Stephen. Amy, prediction.
I was going to say that I've been watching the news closely, because there are so many articles that have been coming out just as we've been talking. It says that they're still talking, but it looks like the Bloomberg article I read said that it looks like Portman's version of the bill will go in with what Jason mentioned. All of the comments will go in along with it. So
interesting. David, Amy, thank you. David?
Original language stays. I just don't see the amendments passing right now. It's too politically charged of a bill. I think Schumer is not going to end up allowing the amendments to be voted on.
David, thank you. Jason, prediction?
So I was forced to make this prediction last week in something that's going to come out in a podcast in a couple of days. And so I'm going to stick to my prediction, even though there are a lot of headwinds, in that I think that we will get a Lummis, Wyden, Toomey version of the amendment into the bill.
All right. And I just want to point out, Mitchell noted that there were 535 amendments proposed to the bill. So it's there's a lot. Sean, last comment from you. Prediction.
I would say I hope it gets added, but I'm not really feeling confident about it right now.
I will predict, probably, hopefully incorrectly, that David, I'll agree with you that the original language will stay, but we're running down to the wire, folks. It is not too late. So Landon mentioned it earlier. We've all mentioned it here. Reach out to your representatives. We're all part of this industry. It is important. It really does matter. I want to thank my panelists, Stephen, David, Amy, Jason, Sean. Thanks so much. It was great to hear from Landon as well. All the great questions from our attendees. This is being recorded and we'll make it available to members in the next several days as well. And as we hear news, we will share through the Slack as well. So everyone, thank you so much for being here. It's a privilege and looking forward to chatting again soon. Panelists, thanks again, friends.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.